In this tape, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the administrators working for the Mariners, the Tacoma hospitals, the city office and county, the NAACP, local politicians in Seattle particularly, have done to me. I'm not going to list the crimes committed or the injuries endured. I'm going to concentrate simply on the role that they forced me to play. Who allowed them to force me to play this role? And you can see for yourself by their determination to enforce this role that they see some great benefit to themselves for doing it. For the people in Hollywood, taking James McRyland Curry and casting him as an insignificant person, unaware that he was being hotwired into a big picture, was Mount Everest. It was something they wanted to climb because it was there, because they could think of it. And it's important to understand that the way that they went about it from psychological research forces was the bad blood of the Pittsburgh police towards people who were in public schools and getting acquainted and growing up, but not necessarily understanding and abiding by all of the proprieties of the draft board's era of suppression of protest and political dissent. I was born in 1960. I was just a child when this started. But they had Broadway musicals like Jesus Christ Superstar. The Beatles were actually named by Adolf Hitler after his Volkswagen, the Beetle, VW Beetle. And it is relevant that John Lennon didn't really die. It is relevant that the person they claim killed him was never arrested, was never subjected to any of this abuse. It is relevant that Yoko Ono had a vendetta motive against my father, who was murdered by this cartel. So they saw me as an heir apparent. They're attacking a symbol of the United States of America. James McRyland Curry has the IAMs of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. My father was on Bush's ship in the Navy, and we know that W, the second George Bush, was considered an heir apparent to the American executive. My name is like Jimmy C. Ronnie and Casper attacked me. Jimmy Carter is Jimmy C. too. Ronnie and Casper is like Ronald Reagan and Caspar Weinberger. So clearly, this is Elizabeth in theater. If you want to know who did it, it was her Queen Elizabeth's cousin Richard. Did this with Richard Carl, Richard McGarvey, and Ringo Starr, Richard Starkey. What they did, they cast me in this Truman Show with Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey is my name, to avenge the decision to drop the atom bomb by way of violating the private life of a government object, because Truman objected to J. Edgar Hoover's surveillance of private lives on principle. So it's a double whammy against Harry Truman. And the shrinks will say, well, you're just like Napoleon, go to Notre Dame and play hunchback queerball. But it's clearly a way of burning an American flag. And the fact that I don't consider myself to be an aspirant to that kind of status makes it all the more reasonable, they feel, to do it and be dismissive of my concerns. Obviously, it's criminally insane. Nobody should be held responsible as a battered child for a hot-wiring job into a big picture by way of what they claim was the Lennon murder caper. But it's straight out of the film Sleuth, starring Michael Caine, a friend of Paul McCartney. It's one turn of the turnstile after another, one trick of the trade after another. one trick of the tail after another. And it was all planned back in 1919. The sinister contraption that I unearthed shows that the script was planned not from 1974, but it's in their movies. It's encrypted in Woody Allen's movies. It's encrypted in Dee Dee Allen's movies. It's encrypted in Taxi Driver. And the phenomenon of having a protagonist, antagonist in the same body, not only is the idea of the song I Am the Walrus, which is one of the headlines on the script, but it also raises the philosophical questions that Pitt is famous for bandying. Who is the most appropriate person to consider the scrivener to be like? And they bring in the Christians to say the common man is this and that relationship to the star of the New Testament and so on. And they say, he's like Napoleon because none of this is real. And it's an agency of sorts. Like they murdered Shannon Harps and they lined up people. It has nothing to do with me, but they get people to think of me when they hear something about something else. And then the poachers and the company who's affected by this come and say he's answerable to me. Like Yoko Ono says he's answerable to me about John Lennon. Bo Diddley probably thinks I'm answerable to him about my views about Jesse Jackson in the 1980s. And I held Ralph Abernathy's hand, but that's not relevant. I love the civil rights movement, but that's not relevant either. What's relevant is that they shouldn't be allowed to do this. The administration allows them to do it. The court refused to give me a mandamus against Bob Ferguson, who's obviously laughing his ass off. So you have this idea of like Bruno Bettelheim, don't you dare come to my attention, he said, is what the concentration camp guards said. So they have these hip hop artists, Yoko Ono has them all hotwired in. Do not dare come to my attention, like concentration camp guards. And she will generate evil inventions from people in Tacoma, in Paradise, California, in Seattle, in Pittsburgh, in Rhode Island. She'll get people who knew Hugh Hefner. And any inflection, she'll come and send one of their drone warriors to say, you are answerable to me. And it's Satyricon. It has nothing to do with the sacred. It's true that under hallucinations, people could have seen John Lennon as some Christ-like figure, but he's a Christ-like figure of Satyricon. It's sacrilegious Christ-like figure. So you get these things that they put up at like the Paris Olympics, where the people who were actually behind it make themselves look like they're being culturally victimized for not being allowed to depict themselves as Bacchanalia Christ-like figures, because it's an offense against sacred John Lennon. The wingnut, Amanda Harcourt, who poachered her way into fame by abusing me this way, said me something about the season of truculent machines. Does that phrase make you want to go cross-eyed? It becomes treason of succulent machines. So the Bacchanalia satire has morphed into true treason against the people who were slashing Shannon Harps over a penny. That's their idea of, the corporate franchise. They have Mel Gibson. Martin Scorsese is playing for my girlfriend. They have car thieves, carjackers aplenty to act out any hatred that UW Dialectical construes as justifiable. And it comes from the mind of not only the Kennedy assassinations, but a man named Borges. Borges gave um, a man who was challenging the El Bosso of a gang the opportunity to sleep with the boss's girl and all these other things before they said, okay, that's enough, and they got rid of him. They killed him or something. And what they did with me was they hired a bimbo to give me her virginity because the whole hoax of the crime, Elizabethan theater thematic partnership between these moguls was two virgins pussy ball of race exchange in nature, and to illustrate the ark covenant of the sexual exchange between the pimp moguls. And you can see this in Diva. You can see this in the Telltale clip. You can see this in Midori Goto's strutting back in the 90s, what happened at Carnegie Mellon University with the Diva Barack Obama. You can see it from Mount Desert Island, from the script itself, from everything that they did when they, and John Lennon's music. He wrote Two Virgins. So it was his idea, and it is relevant that the evidence shows that he was the face behind the face of the Truman Show. It actually is relevant that the person who they claim killed him is their partner and that he did not really die. But they have this story, they call it the little girl, and they get their cheap thrills. They made pornographic genocide movies of me. They turned me into a male entertainer of women who never got paid for entertaining the women, but they made movies of me. And so you get these cheap thrill racketeers in places like Seattle who sell these films as The Walrus about John Lennon through the Sotheby's underworld with the help of Michael Caine. And that's what they've been doing. And it's a pork barrel of how do you interpret this situation? They should not have been allowed to do it, you know, then they put it on, and so it's some kind of trial.